And I don't know if you're talking to us, but you're muted.
Hi, everyone. This is Ann Cuppinger from the Community Technical Assistance Center. And I see everybody signing in, and that's terrific. We'll give you just a couple minutes, and then we'll get started. While you're here and waiting, if you can chat in your name, your pronouns, and what agency you work with or where you're from in New York State. If you're not with a particular agency, that'll give us an idea of who's here and what kind of work you're doing. Once again, if you've just joined us, we're just giving everyone a chance to sign in and get settled. If you want to chat in your name, your pronouns, and where you're from or what agency you work with, that would be great. If you want to know where the chat box is, there's a little button bubble over to the right-hand side where it says chat. If you click on that, it'll open up the chat box. And you can choose to chat to everyone, so everybody who's on the webinar can see that you're here. And we'll get started in just 1 minute. All right. So I would like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar, Creating Inclusive Environments in Peer Roles, Navigating Mental Health in the LGBTQ+ community, and Understanding Gender. I'm Ann Cuppinger. I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and I feel so lucky today to be introducing you to Robbie Lettieri, who is the Youth Peer Services Training and Credentialing Manager at Families Together in New York State. And he'll say a little bit more about himself later, but he has a lot of really wonderful experience in lots of areas, including in supporting the work of youth peer advocates. So I want to give everyone a little bit of an introduction to the WebEx system. I don't know about you, but I've gotten used to Zoom, so I've had to remind myself how WebEx works. There are a lot of folks registered for this webinar today, so you've all been joined in listen-only mode. But we really want to hear from you, so the best way for that to happen is for you to really make good use of the chat function. You can click on the chat bubble that should be over on the right-hand side of your screen, and that will open up a chat box. And in that chat box, you see a little bit of a drop-down menu. It should be set to everyone. And that's a great place for you to chat your questions to everyone, so all of the panelists and other people attending the webinar can see your question. If you have any reluctance to chat your question to everyone, you can chat the question to just the panelists. But I would, kind of reserve that for, really specific needs that you might have. If you have any technical difficulties, you can chat to the host. And in this system, the host is listed as the CTAC admin, and either Shivi or Fung will respond to your question. The other thing that I want to tell you about today is that this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar and the slides and some related support materials will be posted to the CTAC website in, usually 3 or 4 days. The way you find them on the website is you go to our website and you look under a tab called Upcoming Events. And there, you'll find a calendar there. And if you navigate to today's date, June 9th, on that date, where right now you'll find registration information, in the future, what you'll find is a link to the recording and all of the materials from today's webinar. So I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Robbie and our wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Ann. Hey, everybody. So as Ann graciously said, my name is Robbie Lettieri. My pronouns are he and him, and I am the Youth Peer Services Training and Credentialing Manager at Family Together in New York State. So today we're going to be talking about the LGBTQ plus community and understanding gender, how that relates to the role of the youth peer advocate, and in general, how we as a society can come together to support this population. So I personally am a gay man, just putting that out there so people know for reference. And I do not have experience in every population that we're going to be discussing today, which is why I'm really grateful that we have an incredible team of panelists that are going to be joining me later on. We have Aliyah Pierre, we have Ari Seuss, we have Amari Wilson, and we have Zach Kilmer. And I'm really grateful that they're all here today, and I'm sure that you're all going to love what they have to offer to this. So just to get us started, kind of just read some bullet points very generally, and then we'll get into some conversation. But during this module, we will explore the meaning of gender, sex assigned at birth or biological sex, intersex, transgender, gender fluidity, and much more. We're going to discuss experiences for the trans community, such as gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia. We're going to address common struggles within the LGBTQ plus community regarding their emotional well-being and access to support services. We're going to acknowledge and explore experiences of the LGBTQ plus youth for the BIPOC community. We're going to uncover our own prejudices that we might have, and we're going to work towards inclusion. We're going to explore opportunities to create inclusive environments within our own therapeutic space, wherever that may be. And we're going to dive into some more information that we'll see as we go along. And please, something to keep in mind throughout this all is that the common challenges faced by the LGBTQ plus community may vary drastically based on our physical attributes. So for instance, a white trans man or a white trans woman might have a drastically different experience than our Black or brown brothers, sisters, and siblings. So throughout this module, we're really going to take into consideration cultural and racial disparities throughout society and how individual experiences may vary upon each population that we interact with. So to kick it all off, I'm going to ask if in the chat, if we can all write what it means to us when we hear the term biological sex. My gender at birth, what we are genetically born with, the gender at birth, sex you were born with, sex assigned at birth, yes, great. Gender at birth, sex at birth, awesome. Okay, this is really great to see. So yes, sex assigned at birth is one's biological and physical attributes, external genitalia, sex chromosomes, hormones, and internal reproductive structures that are used to assign someone as male or female or intersex at birth. We're going to talk about intersex a little bit more in depth later on. But before we get to that, we're just talking about the genitalia primarily that someone is born with and how doctors will label them as either male, female, or intersex. So are there only two genders out there? Can you put this in the chat? Can someone only be a boy or a girl? No, no, no. All right, nice. So the answer is no. And that is where we get into intersex. So this is a term used for individuals born with variations in sex characteristics. So that being reproductive or sexual anatomy or chromosome pattern that does not fit the typical binary notions of male or female bodies. So that can be someone who is born with male genitalia, but they might have female genitalia internally. So for instance, whether they have predominantly male genitalia, but they have ovaries on the inside, or someone who is born predominantly with female genitalia, but they might have testes internally as well. And something that is really struggling to hear is that doctors have the ability to perform surgery on babies as soon as they are born without even getting consent from the parents. So if there is one organ that it might appear to be more predominant than the other, they can remove the other one without even letting the parent know or asking them if they would like them to remove that organ. And that creates a lot of challenges later on in life when people have a bunch of mixed emotions and might not be able to understand why that is or how come they're feeling that way. And there are a lot of other reasons why that happens, but we will talk about that in more depth in just a little bit. So gender is not something that could be assigned. Only you know your own gender. We all have the ability to express ourselves in a different way. in different ways, but we might not be comfortable enough to do so. So what is gender at the root of it? So internal feelings, how am I feeling in my own body? Outward expression, how am I portraying myself to the world around me? And then taking into consideration social norms and social constructs. So can we think of any other way that we might identify gender in the chat? If you can't think of any, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. Clothing? Okay, yep, that's going into gender roles, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, actually. Asking someone, mannerisms. Pronouns, awesome, yes. Self-identity, great. All right, awesome, yes. So there are many ways that someone might identify their own gender, and they might express that gender. Looking at, gender roles. So for instance, I am a cis male or a cisgendered male, which means that I identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. And we're going to talk about cisgender a little bit later. But, I was born and labeled as being a male, and I identify as being male to this day. And so my parents always would encourage me to play with, cars. And when I asked for Lord of the Rings action figures, they were very enthusiastic about that. Or if I wanted a little Richter set, or if I wanted a microscope, because I was really into science and still in love with science to this day. But things that are predominantly more that fit into that male bubble, that blue bubble, right? But when we look at that, that's not taking into consideration the other desires that people might have. For instance, I remember being 8 years old when Britney Spears put out the Oops, I Did It Again music video. And I loved me some Britney. And so anyway, she put out a Barbie doll of her in the red suit. And I wanted that Barbie doll so bad, but my parents wouldn't get it for me. And so my cousin's Grandpa Mike, he brought us to KB Toys a couple weeks later, and he brought me that Barbie doll that I loved. But when I went home, my parents were not enthused, to say the least. And I'm also recognizing right now, I'm a gay man. I played with Barbies. Let's not make that a stereotype. But it was something that I liked. It was a way for me to express myself, to use my imagination. And what are some other ways that we might hear as boys play with GI Joes, girls play with Barbies, boys play sports, girls have tea parties. What are some other things that we might think of when we look at the binary? Feel free to put that in the chat. Emotions, clothes. Yeah, so emotions, boys typically are taught to hold it in. We don't really express our emotions very well. Clothing could vary drastically. Girls are pink, boys are blue. Boys like sports, girls like dance. Females in the kitchen, men working outside, yes. Career choices, definitely. Emotions, chores, clothing, social expectations, absolutely. These are great. Behaviors, intimate relationships. Definitely. Thank you all for that response. And so looking at this, if I'm a boy and I like some stereotypical girl activities, that doesn't change who I am. Only I have the ability to say that I am a male. I identify as a male. My pronouns are he, him, and that's who I am. No one can change that for me. They might have their own biases in their head that say, oh, he shouldn't be doing that. He shouldn't be cleaning the house or cooking. He should be outside. All these different things. But we hear a lot of rules that we try to follow as we grow up. And I feel like now we're at a time when we're trying to break down those stereotypes and those barriers that we have built for ourselves. Also, just a little tidbit of information. Blue is now known for boy and girl is for pink. But actually before World War II, blue is predominantly associated with females because of the delicate nature of the color blue and baby blue. Whereas pink or red was assigned predominantly for men or males because it was very bold and it was associated with blood. But after World War II, Barbie branded with the pink color and then that threw society for a whirlwind, and we had to change the colors back or change them around. So just a little tidbit of information there that I found really interesting. With gender, looking at our gender, so a person's gender is a complex interrelationship between three components: the physical body, the internal identity, and the outward expression. So gender and culture is something that we're going to be looking at a lot today. So individuals who are raised in homes with a lack of support and/or discriminatory remarks might not have the same leisure of voicing their true feelings. So culture has a massive role in one's ability and desire to speak their truth. And again, looking at the processes within society. So for a Caucasian person and a Black or brown person, those experiences might be very, very different. Just like a male might have a very different experience from a female, or a non-binary person and a transgender person might have very or extremely different experiences. So there's a lot to take into consideration when looking at gender and when looking at culture. But all these have validity, and all these have a root that we can play a huge role in achieving equality. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Aliyah out. Aliyah, would you like to introduce yourself? So I know Aliyah, I work with Aliyah. I love Aliyah. I'm really grateful that you're here. So you know me, my name is Robbie. My pronouns are he and him. Would you like to introduce yourself and your pronouns and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Robbie, first of all, for this opportunity. My name is Aliyah Pierre. My pronouns are she and her. I am from Brooklyn, New York. What else you want to know, Robbie?
Do you want to tell us where you work and what your job title is?
Yeah, so I'm the regional youth partner over at Youth Power and Families Together. I'm the regional youth partner for New York City. I'm a bisexual woman, and I am proud about it.
Thank you, Aliyah. And I guess to set some ground for us, would you mind or telling us a little bit about when you came out and what it was like for you when you came out?
I came out in 2000, I want to say 19. Yeah, so 2 years ago. Wow. 2 years ago. So I knew I was bisexual. I want to say when I was 5 years old, I would have these weird things happening in my head. Well, what was considered weird to me at the time, because I was raised in the church. And so it just seemed so taboo to me to be crushing on my female teacher while having a boyfriend, you know. And then in high school, I actually started to explore that. I had my first girlfriend. At first, we started off experimenting, and then, of course, it moved on. And all of those years, I went through high school, I went through college, I went through most of my 20s, you know, with only my friends knowing and not my family knowing. Until finally, you know, I waited for my mom to ask the question again. I'm just like, you know what? The next time she asks, I'm going to be honest. And she asked, and I was honest. So here I am 2 years later.
Well, congratulations on coming out. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
What was it like? How did your family respond when you came out to them?
It was horrible. It still is horrible. My mom is a hardcore Christian. She was in church all of her life, as well as my grandmother, her mom. So it wasn't easy at all. My dad, he didn't care. You know, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, they don't really care. But because of the fact that I have the closest, well, had the closest relationship with my mother, I guess that was the person who I wasn't trying to hurt. And so coming out to her was a huge step, because I had to risk, you know, no longer having that relationship. And sad to say, we don't speak now, but I've accepted the fact that if you don't accept me, that's on you. I have nothing to do with that.
That's a huge epiphany that I feel like a lot of us in our community have to come to terms with. But it still doesn't make it easier. Did you have any resources in the community that you found beneficial during your time when you came out, or even when you were younger?
When I was younger, absolutely not. Well, I can't say the resources weren't there because I wasn't looking for the resources. I did everything I could to avoid my mom possibly finding out. And so I didn't even go close to anything that resembled homosexuality. Now, as an adult, I can say there are a lot of resources in the community. I can't say that I necessarily utilize those resources, not for any particular reason. I'm just so used to kind of navigating on my own that I've always kind of been that way. So
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And I'm not sorry to hear that. Like, I understand that. I vibe with that. I tried coming out really early and then had to go back in the closet. But again, like I was very afraid to come out and to let people know. So I feel you. I understand that pain, and it stinks. It's not fun. But what do you think a youth peer advocate can do to support a young person who might not have that support system set in stone for them at home, in their community?
for me, I think it's about creating a system of trust. Trust was the biggest thing for me. I didn't mind coming out to people who I trusted wholeheartedly. You know, my biggest issue was always a concern of my mom finding out. And so I just think to be supportive of those who are dealing with, you know, not necessarily being out, just understanding, you know, and steering away from being judgmental, because a lot of times you're working with young people who you can't relate to. And that's the realness of it. Like you have no idea what a young person is personally going through when they are in this lifestyle. And so the best thing to do is just to listen. And if that young person feels confident enough to share the resources that they need, then you assisting in researching, you know, here's what you can do. I can't necessarily be as involved, but here are the resources that you can utilize. I can help you get in touch with this person. I can help you get in touch with that person. Just creating a safe space.
It's great advice. Yeah. And then, so to be a little bit more direct, how do you think that race plays a factor within the LGBTQ plus community?
Absolutely.
And how do you think that youth peer advocates and people in general can be a support to Black and Brown youth who might be a part of the LGBT community?
Um, Again, it's that factor of trust. To be honest, in the Black community, homosexuality is frowned upon hugely. I can't say it's everyone, but being as though like most Black people are identify as Christians and they have that background, it's very tough to now introduce something that's more accepted in society. I mean, I can say it's the same thing for therapy, Black people with therapy. You know, whenever it's something new that's introduced within the Black community, it's not, it takes a very long time to be acceptable. And so I would say to support Black and Brown youth, that level of trust, that's huge. Like, I cannot stress that enough. And just understanding that our resources are very different, like very different, very limited. We, in our communities, we don't have centers where young people can go, and the most we have would be after school programs, but we don't have any centers or any outlets where homosexuals could go to just be free and be themselves. You know, we have to venture outside of our communities to get that. So I just think being understanding and not being judgmental and being trustworthy are the three biggest things that I could think of.
Thank you so much, Aliyah. I really appreciate all of your responses. And we'll hear a little bit more from Aliyah in just a little bit. So now we're going to move on a little bit. So looking at body. So sex assigned at birth, whether that was male, female, or intersex, and then also acknowledging the fact that gender is a social construct. You know, we all have a body, we all have organs, we all breathe, we all eat, we all sleep, and what clothing we put on our body is made up as to which people should wear which clothing, and how we feel about ourselves is not a construct that is real, that is valid, and we all have our own emotions, and we have the right to express ourselves in different ways, even when society doesn't feel like we should. Looking at body dysphoria. So this is the distress that a person feels when their assigned sex does not match their gender identity. You know, looking in the mirror and saying, I don't identify with this body that I'm looking at. Those don't belong to me. I shouldn't be looking like this. I feel totally different. Um, and this also, for cultural and societal expectations, have a huge role in body dysphoria as well. And it truly affects a person's relationship with their own body. Now, being that I am a cis man, I do not have the personal experience to talk about this, but we are going to be bringing out some panelists in just a little bit to talk further about that. Looking at the internal and external factors. So we have the neurobiological reflective sense of gender. We have gender as a whole, and then we have the external factors that might play into that effect as well. So culture and the external feedback that we get from our immediate circle, our family, our friends, our work, how did those make us feel? What is that shaping inside of us, and how is that creating a barrier to how we express ourselves with those around us? Looking at how we feel internally, you know, if I have a sense of distress because I feel like I don't belong in the body that I'm in, that might create a signal that is going to create a certain outcome within whatever behavioral network that I am in. And vice versa. It all bounces around and it all plays off of one another, how we feel internally and looking at the world around us, getting that external factor. So gender identity and sex are two completely different things. So gender identity is that internal experience of gender. So the most common are the gender binary, so man and woman. There's also transgender or non-binary and non-conforming. Might feel more feminine. My network just got a little wonky. Can you all still hear me?
You're good now, Robbie. We just lost you for a couple seconds there.
Okay. Should I backtrack or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, if you could backtrack like 15 seconds, I think that would be fine.
Okay. I was just expressing that gender is fluid and there isn't only a male and woman, and there's a spectrum where that falls on. So even if someone was born male, female, or intersex, they don't have to stay as only being that I am male, I'm going to do everything that society wants me to do in this male role. It's a pendulum and it's constantly flying back and forth and doesn't have to stay linear. The way that we express our gender is also a continuum. So how we express our gender with the world, our clothing, our hairstyle, our mannerisms, looking at how the binary might restrict those expressions. And we can't assume someone's identity based off of their expression alone. We always have to ask. So looking at myself right now, I'm wearing the color yellow. When I was younger, I didn't have any kind of yellow clothing because it was viewed as more feminine. I have a lavender shirt that I love to wear too that might be pink and that can be feminine. And that's just because I like colors and I like lighter colors, but I'm a male and that's okay if I want to do that. There might be someone who is female who likes soccer, and going back to these full stereotypes that constantly come up in our minds. But anyway, looking at it, it is a continuum, a spectrum that flows back and forth. Looking at some public figures as well. So Janelle Monáe, some of you might know her. She is a singer-songwriter and activist, and an actor as well. And she recently came out as gender fluid. Her pronouns are she and they. Looking at Elliot Page, his pronouns are he and him, actor and activist. And I remember watching an interview with Elliot a couple of weeks ago after they transitioned, and they were crying because they had finally felt like they were in the body that they belonged in. And that was such a revelation and just a really heartwarming experience for me to be able to see someone express true relief and talking about looking back at their life and feeling like they weren't who they were and they were living the life of a lie, and being in movies and always having to play those girly girls, and never actually feeling like that role, but that's what society wanted her to play, so she had to do it. And now he came out as being a transgender male, and he gets to play the roles that he wants to do. He gets to wear the clothes that he wants to. He's in a body that he identifies with, and he can look at himself in the mirror and feel like he is true to himself. And I am really happy for him. Laverne Cox, we might know her from Orange is the New Black and a bunch of other movies or shows. She also was at the drag bar in New York City, Lips, in the early 2000s. I don't know if anyone had seen her there, but she is one of my biggest inspirations in the trans community, and I really look up to her as being a trailblazer. And then Sam Smith recently came out as it being genderqueer. They go by they, them. We might know some of their songs, Stay With Me, Lay Me Down, all those good tunes. But this is just showing public figures that are also involved in our community. So I'd like to bring out Ari for some questions. Ari, hey,
Hi.
you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Ari. I'm non-binary transmasc. I use they pronouns, sometimes he, they. And so I'm here with a Youth Power advocate for families together. I'm getting more involved now. I'm still practically new. This is like my second time getting involved in a presentation and such. So I'm doing my
I'm really
best
happy
right now.
that I'm so happy that you're here, Ari. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here too. Thank you.
So can you share this a little bit, when did you embrace your gender expression?
Oh, so back in 2017, I was talking to one of my friends who was trans and everything, and I was talking about I felt dysphoric about my body and everything, and they're like, "Ari, you're probably a trans man and everything," and I'm like, and then just something switched in me, wow, I probably am, and then I remember I kind of always questioned growing up, and I just always put it aside because I had pressure being a girl growing up and socially transphobia and everything, so I just never questioned it until I came to terms with it in 2017. And so not coming to terms to be non-binary happened more in 2019, where I was just I'm very I feel that I need to be more masculine, but I still have femininity in me. So I just feel like there was a balance. And so just it just felt, I'm just trying to find my words. I have it written down.
It's
So
okay.
yeah, I'm just a little nervous because again, second time. So it's just finding that I was a balance and learning about things online, that gender is a social construct and everything, that I'm like, you know what? I feel like I'm in the balance of both. And you know what? I just find more I still want to transition to more masculine features, but I also want to embrace that femininity I still have, but in a more masculine way.
Thank you, Ari. And you're
The
doing
best way,
amazing.
best way to describe it.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And you have
Yeah.
a lot of encouraging words in the chat right now.
Thank you.
So how did, when you came out at expressing your gender identity, how did that affect your relationship with your family and your friends?
You want to know something? I just recently came out to my mom.
Really,
And
congratulations.
by accident, because I was on the phone with her and she's like, "Oh, your gender identity." I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" Because I never really talked about it with her. And I'm like, I always talked about my friends and everything, but and then I was like, "Have what do you mean by that?" She's like, "Oh, you want to be more, you want to be a man?" And I just broke down and said, "Yeah." And I was just so afraid because for years of social things and just being in the closet so much that the fact that she said she accepted me, I was felt so relieved. And it was that was my biggest challenges, was coming out to her, because she wanted a girl really bad, and I played that part, but I was never comfortable with myself because I always tried to uh dissociated a lot, didn't really care about my body, and then now that I'm more conscious and starting to love myself more, knowing who I am, that I'm able to express that. I did come out to my uncle. He was before my mom, in 2017. He was accepting. My friends are the biggest support because a lot of my friends are LGBTQ plus, and if it wasn't for them, we just gravitate together because, my best friend's trans. I was helping her through her transitioning, coming out, and it's just there was so much support within my friends. They're practically my found family, and that it was just I'm just been lucky with that, to be honest, that I have support. Though, like with my living condition, I do have like housemates that are not supportive and misgender me a lot, even though it's hard. But with that and everything, but otherwise, I'm just really happy that I have a support system.
It's really incredible to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so what community resources, if any, did you utilize during your youth?
To be honest, social media and being part of fandoms were a big part in realizing, like, especially I came out like I knew I liked girls growing up and everything. I came out as bi. I identify as pansexual now, and just being involved with my friends groups, we just gravitate together with being open about it, and just going to. I'm very into fandoms, like going to anime conventions and stuff, and just finding people that are similar and out about their identity and sexuality. Like social medias like Tumblr, Instagram, Twitter. I always find sources without trying because I just stumble upon it, and then I learned over time, and then it helped me. The internet
Right
was a big factor of me coming to terms with myself.
Right on. Thank you, Ari. And so my last question for right now is, how can a youth peer advocate support our non-binary and gender fluid youth?
Just being open and communication and being there for them and try to support them the best you can, try to find sources and find ways to easily talk to someone about their identity. And if they like, you could try so much, like you can tell someone you so much and then they don't put the effort into looking into themselves. Going back to my mom, I didn't expect my mom to, she actually put the effort into looking into it. Apparently, her going to third or like doing groups and stuff, talking to other trans people and such and non-binary people that and me talking about, she actually put the effort into trying to understand and everything. And just being there for people that don't have that support.
Your mom sounds like a pretty great person, Ari.
Yeah, she's great.
Alrighty. Well, we will chat again in a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, moving right along, we're now going to look at the spectrum of gender and gender identity. So this is the genderbread person. So I really like this image because it really kind of creates a way to envision what it means, both at sex or all, sex expression, attraction, and gender identity. So looking at gender, predominantly looking at the binary, we have woman and man. And there's that continuum. You might be all the way on one side, all the way on the other side, or you might fall a little bit in the middle and you might switch between your masculine and feminine sides. Gender expression, again, and that falls in between biological sex, or looking at intersex as well, which isn't listed on here, but is also really important to take into consideration. And then attraction. So I feel like a lot of times people might think that you have to fall in love with either a male or a female, and that's not true. You can fall in love with people's personalities. You can fall in love with just a person. You might not want to have any kind of sexual relationships, but you have a pure platonic relationship. And these are all valid. These are all experiences that many people have, and that should be honored and respected. And there is no right or wrong way to live and to love. I feel like everyone on this earth wants to love and is worthy of love. And that's really what I want to express, that we all have that same right. So cisgender, which is what I was talking about a little earlier on, that means that I was born with I was assigned the sex at birth that I identify with now later on in life. So cis comes from the Latin term meaning the same. And back in 2017, it was added to the Webster's dictionary, which it talks about the actual definition. So an adjective describing a person whose gender identity corresponds to their assigned sex at birth. For example, an individual who is assigned the sex designation of female at birth and whose gender identity is female. So it stays the same. It doesn't overlap or it doesn't leave. It remains that continuous female, male, or intersex. Sexuality. So an inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Sexuality is about your feelings, thoughts, attractions, and behaviors towards other people. So you can find other people physically, sexually, or emotionally attractive, and all those things are part of your sexuality. Sexuality is diverse and personal, and no one else can tell you what your sexuality is. So I don't. This is this is in the dictionary under the definition for sexuality. However, I personally, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the chat on what you think it consists of sexuality. Do you believe that it is, attraction to all aspects, physically, sexually, and emotionally? Or, what does that look like for you? Feel free to put it in the chat. No worries. All right, I don't see anything in the chat just yet, but that is okay because we're going to talk about it. Any one or all of the list. Thank you, Skina. So yeah, it's comprised of a bunch of different ideas and topics. I like the definition of sexuality includes emotional, romantic, and sexual attraction because they are separate concepts. Absolutely. I always thought sexuality is what you like, not necessarily who you identify as. That's a really great point. This is something that is very internal. And someone can express outwardly how they identify sexually. So how I stated I'm a gay man, someone might be straight or pansexual, bisexual. The list can go on. And again, it's not up to us to decipher what that is and which is right or wrong, because there is no wrong. Physical and emotional attraction. All right, great. Thank you. And so sexuality, for me, has been an interesting subject when I was younger. I had a disability when I was younger, and I still do. It's not as easily seen nowadays. However, that played a really big role in my sexuality and me coming to terms with my sexuality and coming out. I love people in general. I find that I am more emotionally attracted to women because I feel like I can have deeper conversations. I'm more comfortable around women, but I found my soulmate in a man, and I am extremely grateful for him, and I love him. And it's also a challenge because at his work is very discriminatory, and he has to hear discriminatory remarks every day, and he can't be open there, and that has a lot of stress and causes a lot of stress in his life. And so if we can create environments where people can be who they are without fearing to express that, or without having fear that someone is going to find out and then they'll be fired, or they're going to get made fun of, or they're going to be living a not so desirable life because of what comes along with that, I think we can work towards that, and that is in reach if we all come together to be more open and accepting. So I'd like to talk to Zach now, if that's all right with you, Zach. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Absolutely not.
Thank you for that.
Hey everyone. My name is Zach Kilmer. Pronouns are he, him. Is my fan loud? Can you guys hear me?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, good. Yeah, pronouns are he, him. I am the Amplify New York and Public Policy Coordinator here at Families Together. And I identify as a cisgender gay man. And also happy Pride Month, everyone.
Happy Pride indeed, Zach. All right. Thank you for being here. And just like everybody else, I'd like to start out with some background. And if you can share with us when you came out and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so I was fairly certain I wasn't straight from a very early age, around like 12 years old, I could probably say. I thought I was bisexual for the longest time. I kind of came out in very small chunks, I call it. Like if we're using the closet metaphor, like I like peeked a head out and then went back in and then like maybe like a whole arm and then went back in. Like it wasn't like I am all the way 100% out of the closet. It was a very much an incremental thing over the course of many years. I came out to my mom as a bisexual when I was like 14. Could have gone better. Also could have gone a lot worse. It was very much a mixed bag. Um, and then basically from there on in, I came out to key people, and just like very strategically coming out. And then until eventually, I think around when I got to college, I was like, okay, I am just now openly and 100% um, out of the closet. What actually inspired me to fully come out of the closet was this journey I had in college when I was banned from donating blood because I'm gay, which is a whole nother topic. But men who have sex with men are banned from donating blood in a lot of circumstances. And back then it was like a lifetime ban. And that made me so angry to the point where I came out and decided in order to basically advocate against that. But yeah, that was kind of the final linchpin, so to speak.
Thanks, Zach. And yeah, that is, it's an upsetting fact for our community that we're not allowed to donate blood. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to.
Yeah, that could be a whole webinar in and of itself.
Indeed. So growing up, what was it like for you? You said that, you came out a little bit here and there. Did you have a good support system within your friends and family? Were you able to come out to some?
Um, Family, not right away. Now I do, for sure. Friends, yes. It's kind of like Ari was saying. I don't know what the scientific reason is for this, but I feel like queer people, even when they don't know that they're queer, naturally gravitate to each other, almost like a solar system, like that starts to revolve around the sun. It's it's really really interesting how like even if you haven't come to terms with your identity, it's like almost like your subconscious knows, and you tend to just subconsciously seek out other people who are like you, even if you're not fully aware at the conscious level yet. So I think that kind of happened in like early high school, late middle school. Basically, there was the group of friends that were all LGBT in some way, even though some of us didn't even like know it yet. And within that group, I found my first group of understanding people who I could felt like I could finally start to be my entire self with and relate to. And I found more and more of those people as went on, either on purpose or, as Ari said, by accident.
Awesome. Thank you. Uh, Also, kind of following suit, what kind of resources did you have growing up, if any, that might have supported you?
I think it was honestly mostly friends and like other queer people. I didn't utilize any like formal resources, like anything like at my schools or places of work or anything like that. Probably should have, but I either didn't know they existed or I was like, I don't need that. I'm fine. Spoiler alert, I wasn't fine and I needed them. But like I realized the more you hang out with other queer people, the more accepting of yourself you become. At least that's how it was for me. Like when I studied abroad, just this was purely by accident. The group I was with just was like 3/5 LGBT people, and it was like we were in a house where like it was majority the straight cisgender people were in the minority for the first time. Like and like that, it was like a default queer environment, and it felt almost kind of empowering in that way. It felt like I'm the default, I'm normal, and like I could like feel that way all the time. And I was like, whoa, is this allowed? That's a revelation. That's awesome.
It was like when we talked about that on the Free to Be podcast that we host together, going to Fire Island, stepping off the boat and seeing the flags and just being totally accepted and unapologetically yourself is so empowering. And that was the first time that my boyfriend and I ever held hands in public when we went there a couple of years ago. And I'll never forget that day because it was like I left at Long Island where we feel like we have to hide who we are a lot of the times, and then getting off a boat and just being like, wow, everyone is a part of our community here, so we don't have to hide it. and just seeing how accepting everyone was, it was a huge advantage, and it was really life-changing.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up. I can't believe I forgot to bring that up. Me and Robbie host an LGBTQ New York youth podcast called Free to Be. I'm going to shameless plug, put the link to that in the chat. Thanks for bringing that up. If y'all listen to podcasts, you can subscribe to that wherever you get your podcasts. But like you were saying, yeah, that's why like queer affirming spaces are so important, whether that be gay bars, your gay straight alliance clubs in high school, like whatever that space ends up being. That's why it's so important, because like it's nice to feel like it is assumed that I am not straight in this particular space, and that can feel really affirming when you're not used to that. And this is something I always tell a lot of my like straight cisgender friends who might not be in the community and might not might not know a lot of this stuff. I always bring up the example of the hand holding test. Like a straight or straight passing couple can usually hold hands wherever they want. Me and my boyfriend, for example, and a lot of this is the same case in a lot of queer relationships. You have to think about, is this area safe for me to do that? Am I going to be harassed? Like, that's something I have to think about before I do that each time, which is unfortunate, but it's also very demonstrative of this concept.
Definitely. And just for everyone's reference, we are monitoring the questions in the chat, and we are going to take time at the end to address those questions during our Q&A portion. I do want to ask you one more question, Zach, and that is, what can youth peer advocates do to support young people who might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, in your opinion?
It's honestly really just a matter of like listening. Well, that and also educating yourself. But I mean, like y'all, by attending this, you're already taking a first step to that, which is very good. But like knowing your stuff, knowing the terminology, like even if you don't identify with the LGBTQ community, like knowing the vocab and knowing the concepts can get you miles ahead already. And once you have that base of knowledge, being able to talk to these youth in their language just goes well above and beyond, probably in a lot of cases, what they're used to. And also just listening. Like there's this like I come from like a comedy theater background, and there's this concept in improvisational comedy called yes and like honestly that concept can apply to a lot of other things too. Like if a youth tells you who they are and what they are, say yes and then say and agree and then build onto it. Even if you're confused by something, like any of that kind of thing, just accepting who they are and then helping them to build upon that and improve their situation, or just begin to accept who they are. That will, you're in a lot of cases you're going to be their favorite person just by doing that, because a lot of us didn't have that kind of thing.
Yeah, growing up, I remember when I would go to therapist, and I never really had the opportunity, or I never felt like I had the opportunity to come out as being gay to my therapist, because I was always afraid of them, like I was afraid of everyone else. And then one time I met someone, and he, upon meeting him, came out and expressed that he was a gay man who was married, and like I started crying immediately because I had felt like I never really had that kind of interaction at a young age. And I still wouldn't come out. I didn't come out at that point. But I think he caught my drift.
I think he probably gathered based on the context of that. Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you, Zach. And we're definitely going to talk further in a little bit. So I am going to start going through the information a little bit faster, because I do want to take some time for Q&A towards the end. And we have talked a bit about gender fluidity, but just really quickly, this is looking at gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and who someone is attracted to, and they're all very different human experiences. So there's a fluidity between our physical and external experiences and expressions, and how we identify these experiences internally, as well as with the world. So transgender describes a person whose gender identity or gender expression is different from their assigned sex at birth. So if one identifies as transgender, their gender identity differs from their assigned sex. So there are many different ways that someone can transition within our society, and that can be a social transition. coming out to our friends and family, expressing ourselves within society, and using our preferred name and or pronouns. We can medically transition, which can be comprised of many different therapies or surgeries. And it comes down to the legal transition, which in some cases can be the most challenging. And that is the name change, updating your identification to match your gender identity, and putting your name and your pronouns on all of your forms and getting the government to recognize and acknowledge that. So mental health in the trans community, gender identity is not a mental illness. So before 2013, trans individuals were diagnosed by mental health professionals to have a gender identity disorder. So after the DSM-5 was revised in 2013, the medical community finally acknowledged that it's not an identity disorder, it is gender dysphoria, which we're going to talk about. And I also want to take a minute to say that the LGBTQ plus pride movement would not be where it is or what it is without our Black and Brown brothers, sisters, and siblings, because they really trailblazed the path for us. And it was not easy, and it still is not easy. We have a lot to do as a society and as individuals to bring us up to an even playing field and where everyone is accepted and equal in all aspects of life. So looking at LGBTQ plus youth within the BIPOC community, 1 in 2 LGBTQ plus African American youth say that their families are not supportive of LGBTQ plus people. So Black students are 3 times as likely to be suspended from school as their white counterparts. And 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ. And what's even more troubling to hear is that 31% of that 40% identify as African American. This is blatantly calling out the disparities within our society, and we have to work to level the playing field, and we need to work it so that everyone can be accepted. Also, LGBTQ plus youth who experience a high level of family rejection are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide, 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs, and are 3 times at a higher risk for HIV. This compared to LGBTQ plus youth who experience low levels of family rejection. And we might ask why that is. So 1, maybe they have access to resources because they don't have to hide it. 2, maybe they're more likely to talk about it and get the resources, supports, and education that they need in order to live a successful and healthy life. Or it can just go to the very root of it, that someone doesn't want to associate with the life that they were brought up in, and so they seek to escape. Before we continue on to actually creating inclusive environments, I would like to speak with Amari. Amari, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, there you are. How are you? Would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. My name is Amari Wilson. I am the Youth Peer Engagement Specialist with the Office of Mental Health on a grant called Systems of Care and High Fidelity Wraparound.
Thank you, Amari. Can you, like everyone else, express to us, when you came out as trans and what your experience was like?
Yeah, of course. So I forgot to mention my pronouns. My pronouns are he and they, and I am a Black trans affirming individual of sorts, and probably still going to figure that out and unpack it later on. It's hard to think about when I came out, because I feel like in self-reflection, I realized there's so many areas growing up where I was expressing it, but I didn't have the language to say I'm trans. Because I didn't know that trans men existed probably until maybe about 2013. So, I distinctly remember sharing, wanting to express my clothing differently for prom in 4th grade, and or expressing different things to close family members or family friends at younger ages that would be more in line with not feeling comfortable or not feeling affirmed or in line with the gender that I was assigned at birth, and the expressions that, the social expressions that come with that identity. In 2013, 2014 is when I found the language to express my trans alignment. Um, and that was through, like Ari said, through social media. It really, really helped through like going through Tumblr pages, and finding specifically Black trans individuals, because I knew trans people at that time, but I didn't have a story that really helped me to see how I could be in the trans community. And that's when I really started to see myself reflected. And I learned that, you know, somebody's transition is really their own. And really started to think like, if I did think that I might not like want to stay where I'm at, stay in the gender that I am, what does that look like for me? And that's when I started to like look into my healthcare and to look into what's available to me. Thankfully, through New York State has a lot of good practices as opposed to other states. But you know, we always strive for better. Uh, I did eventually kind of come out to my close family, my parents, in about 2015, 2016. That was a liberating time, explorative time, an expressive and super scary time, because I am a Caribbean, first generation Caribbean American. And there are a lot of negative and concerns for safety when coming out within the Black community, and even more so within the Caribbean community and within the Jamaican community. So I really had to think about the relationships that I had and how I wanted to share this information in the way that I felt most comfortable and safest. And that's kind of still been an experience because I had to allow for my parents to kind of take that journey to transition with me, and allow them some leniencies to learn and unlearn some things that they've been taught.
Thank you so much for that. That was really beneficial. And I'm very sorry that I might have outed you before you said your pronouns. I thought I heard you say them. I apologize for that.
No, you
However,
didn't. You didn't.
I also wanted to really acknowledge the fact that you separate between the Black community at large and also the Caribbean community. Can you speak a little bit more to that, please?
Yeah, I think there are just some different experiences that you know, African Americans have had within the United States, that you know are innately, you know, tied back to African culture, Caribbean culture, Latin American culture, wherever we have come from in our like diaspora, but the practices and the created cultures within African Americans of the United States, um, though they may resemble other places, it's still like a place of, you know, um, like a focus on Christianity, on focus towards um, maintaining a family unit. And I think that is mirrored in other countries, in other lands and islands. Um, but I think, you know, with different sets of resources, it just looks different. It's kind of hard to explain. I actually don't know if I've ever been asked that. So thank you. I'm gonna think about that some more.
Well, thank you so much for that. Um, can you speak a little bit to the benefits of gender affirming language and gender affirming approaches?
Yeah, of course. When I think about gender affirming, I guess I like kind of catch it on to gender affirming care. I think about it for myself. That means that I take care of myself without worrying about being exploited or studied or triggered. For an example, I've gone into see a primary care physician, and they've sent in their like the students who are at the hospital to learn how to deal with trans patients without sharing with me, the patient, that this is the process that they're using, which is an extremely poor experience to have, because then I have to teach this attending, this attendant, um, while not receiving the care that I'm there to receive. And you know, I would love to teach doctors more often, but you know, that's not currently my lane.
I'm
Um,
sorry that was your experience there. And that shouldn't be your responsibility either.
It really shouldn't, but I'm thankful for it because it made me learn. It gave me a tighter net of community, and within the trans community, we do share agencies and organizations that are affirming. We'll say this place is very affirming to BIPOC individuals. This place is very affirming to gender nonconforming and trans individuals. We'll amplify that so that we know where we can get equitable care from. And on one hand, it is like not great that we have to do that, but I'm glad that that avenues have been created for us to share that information between each other. I also think that I guess the overall benefit of having gender affirming language is that more people are able to seek and receive the care that they need, whether that's for mental health, physical health, or any other care that they may want to seek out. That can look like having ongoing LGBTQ specific or TGNC or transgender gender nonconforming specific trainings that they're providing to staff and admin. This can look like reassessing policies and forms to be affirming of a person's identified name and gender markers, as well as like using a person's identified name and gender, even if it's different from their legal documentation, when speaking to them specifically, or to other providers about them, with, I guess, where acceptable, when it's safe to.
Definitely. And so just a little bit further, as you know, youth peer advocates work in a variety of different settings, whether that's, mental health, healthcare, juvenile justice, foster care, etc. Working within these systems and services, how can a YPA best support our young Black, trans, and Caribbean trans people?
I think to best support, I think a lot of what some of the other panelists have shared kind of amplifies the best ways to support. There's asking the young person, what would you like me to do to be a better ally to you? I think, especially within the youth peer advocate setting, we refer to what the young person identifies their support looking like. And I think by asking specifically, one, you may be the first person to ask that question, and it may be a point of engagement that you two can have to figure out not only for them what does safety for them look like, but it's a great way to engage with them and to let them know that you're in a position to keep them safe and as successful as they are looking to be.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge point to be made, is that asking them, what do they think that they need? What is their opinion? What do they want from us? That should be the first approach, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think also like within the trans community, we just recognize that mistakes will be made. I know I have experienced people who have made mistakes when either noting my name or my pronouns. I think as providers or as allies in general, like people in general, we can acknowledge mistakes, be open and humble when creating them. That if you make one, you just own it and quickly correct yourself and move on. I think there's socially a aspect where we want to apologize profusely or express, the work that we've done to try and learn somebody's, like, commit our mind to knowing somebody's name and pronouns. But I guess for perspective purposes, as a trans identified person, it sometimes puts the work on us to hold your mistake, or to like absolve you from your mistake when we all make them, and it's astounding the amount of times like we hear people like say, oh, I worked so hard, and it's like, yeah, that's great, but I literally cannot do anything with that. Like, I understand you made a mistake, but like, we just wanted to order burgers, man. Like, move on. So I think like just acknowledging mistakes and moving forward and taking time to practice on your own. As far as when we're looking at more specified or more marginalized communities within the trans community, It's educating ourselves on the experience of Black and Brown trans youth. A lot of those statistics that you shared are really important. How housing can affect job, ability to have jobs. Your employment can affect other areas, that there are disproportionate policing practices when it comes to Black and Brown people in general. And that's compounded when we think about trans individuals, especially as adults. Black and Brown trans women and Latina trans women are most at risk for harm and victimization. So if we are educating ourselves for a lot of the experiences that Black and Brown trans youth and Black and Brown trans adults will have, I think that puts us in a space to recognize where we can provide resources or share resources that they may not be aware of, resources that are affirming to their experiences, and then taking that time to listen to their own experiences, which may be different than our learning.
100%. Thank you so much, Mari.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to come back to Mari in a little bit when we get to our Q&A. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. In the interest of time, I am going to skip over some of the slides so that we can have some more time to talk about how we create inclusive environments, and then also allow time for you all who are here attending to ask us some questions. So really quick, I do want to note, I know that we've talked about gender dysphoria and the effect that can have, but earlier, or a couple of weeks ago, Myra and I were talking, and they brought up the fact that there's also something called gender euphoria, and that is when, we approach with affirming language and with affirming practices and when that individual has the opportunity to express themselves, they don't have that, mismatch of emotions anymore. They're fully in line with who they are and who they feel that they've always been, and that creates the opposite end of the spectrum being euphoric. So I just want to point out and thank Amari for that point the other day. Going through, I am going to just really go past this fast. Individuals who experience gender dysphoria may also experience discrimination, victimization, increased risk of suicide, emotional and behavioral challenges, and reduced access to healthcare. That is a really, really big one that we have to address, and I am sorry that we've gone over and I can't talk about that much more right now. Social anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. And within this as well, I want to talk about the fact that we're trying to do a lot right now, but there's a lot more room for us to grow, to create an inclusive society, and to create inclusive environments within our own workspace, within our place of work, within the community when we are meeting with folks and when we're meeting with young people, so that they feel affirmed. There is a statistic that I saw recently, and it's the utilization of one's chosen name and pronoun resulted in a 29% decrease in suicidal ideation and a 56% decrease in suicidal behavior for every context that their preferred name and pronoun was used. So whether that was looking at home, whether that was in school, at work, within their immediate circle with their friends, the more that they are affirmed as the person that they are and that they choose to express with the world has a direct link to their emotional space and how they feel about themselves and feel about life. So I'm gonna be honest right now, it kind of grinds my gears when I hear people say, oh, I don't want to be politically correct all the time. This isn't a matter of being politically correct. This is a matter of saving lives and creating a life where everyone is recognized and honored. The suicide in the trans community, this is one last statistic that I want to look at. In 2018, more than 50% of transgender male teens reported attempting suicide before they were 18 years old. Roughly 30% of transgender female teens attempted suicide before they were 18. And among non-binary youth, 41.8% reported attempting suicide before they were 18 years old. So looking at, the family rejection, looking at bullying and harassment, or feeling unsafe simply because they are who they are, these all play into that road, which can lead them to suicidal ideation and suicidal action. But we have the power to change that by honoring and accepting them for who they are. So how can we create supportive and welcoming spaces? Ask members and participants for their pronouns. use signs and flags and stickers that display gender inclusivity and that display pride for the LGBTQIA+ community. Utilize express gender and names, even if that is not listed in their initial chart. Offering pamphlets and resources, Pride for Youth, the LGBT Network, the Trevor Project, etc. We can go on and send out resources. I'm going to send out some resources after the webinar so that you have them. But the more resources, the better. The more support, the better. And as Amari stated, ask people how we can be a true ally for them. And just for reference here, the bottom left is the traditional LGBT pride flag. The one in the middle is the Black Trans Lives Matter and pride flag. And the one on the right is the trans pride flag. I lost my mouse. I'm trying to change the slides. There we go. All right. So when we're using inclusive language, we're trying to, let's avoid using ladies and gentlemen or miss, ma'am, sir, both genders, opposite gender, and instead say, be more open. Rather than addressing a gender, why not keep that an open-ended sentence or open-ended phrase? Hey there, how can I support you? Students, friends, y'all, folks, everyone, every gender. These are just some very minuscule things that can make a huge difference in the lives of the people around us. So common mistakes. Instead of using the phrase preferred pronoun, just say pronoun. At that point, it's not a preferred pronoun. It's who someone is inside, and they're expressing that to you. So that's just their pronoun. It's not preferred. Saying someone was born a boy or a girl, why not just say assign male or female at birth so that doesn't invalidate who someone is and who someone identifies as. Instead of using he or she or male or female as catch-all for, including both genders or enforcing the binary, use they or all genders. Instead of the term self-identified, I feel like we can just totally drop that label in general so that we can just talk about the person, who they are, who they have expressed to you, and what they have listed within whatever paperwork that they might have given you. And saying someone is female-bodied or male-bodied, just use blatant terms. If you want to specifically address non-trans women, just say non-trans women. It doesn't have to be so you don't have to beat around the bush all the time. So let's try not to assume someone's gender based on the sound of their voice, of their name, or their appearance. Use their name and don't use the pronoun until you know it. Even if you thought that I was a female, but I'm really a male, that would hurt me. If I asked Zach, or I was referring to Zach and say, hey, Zach, and then I talk to someone else and I'm like, oh, she wants this. That can be very offensive and that can really give someone internal conflict. So how about we just swipe that, don't use any kind of pronouns until you know who they are. You can address someone by their name, right? So avoid gender-based language. As Amari stated, don't make a big deal out of it, someone using a name or a pronoun that might not match the legal documentation or your assumptions. It's their right, and it is their decision to express to you or not to express to you who they are based upon where they are within their own journey and if they are ready to come out to you. We can support though by being open, by asking questions, and by asking how we can be a support to the youth and the people around us. I also want to say, be super considerate when having vulnerable conversations. I can't tell you the amount of times I have been asked, and my boyfriend have been asked, oh, who's the male and who's the female in your relationship? You wouldn't ask that to a straight couple. Why do you have to ask it to a gay couple or a lesbian couple or a bi couple? Don't ask questions about surgeries or gender affirming medical care. It's not your place to. If you are that close to a person where it can flow naturally, then by all means, but try and keep it in the other person's hands. Don't try and press it out of them without their consent. And also, just be considerate. That's the bottom line. I'm seeing the time and I'm freaking out. I just saw that. Anyway, moving along. Make notations on records of any name or pronoun changes that one may make. Use language that assures them that they are being taken seriously and that they are not a burden in any way. Don't ask those unnecessary questions. Discuss sensitive topics like previous name in a private setting. You don't have to do that in front of a classroom or in front of a group or in front of their friends. If you know that it's going to be a sensitive topic that you're nervous to have, make sure you're doing that one-on-one when they're in a place where they're comfortable to talk about that. And treat TGNC or transgender and non-conforming people the same as you treat everybody else, because we are all the same at the root of who we are. We are people who are here to love, be loved, and to experience life at the fullest amount that we can. So looking at forms that we might have for intakes in our programs, we want to allow for variance, not just male or female. We want to separate gender identity and sex assigned at birth. We want to create separate spaces for legal name and chosen name, in case that someone's name has not been changed legally. And this can help, I was born Robert, but my name that I tell everyone is Robbie. And I always put that on there too, so it doesn't have to be primarily or only for trans and non-binary young people and adults too. And include a space for pronouns so that you know how to address people when working with them and when interacting in life. So looking at spaces, avoid gendered spaces like bathrooms, events, and imagery, and provide access to gender neutral bathrooms. I've been seeing gender neutral bathrooms a lot more now, and it's really heartwarming for me to see too. And I'm cisgendered, but I also love the fact that everyone can share the same space and we don't have to say you go there, I go here, and that's that. And it's also going to create a more inclusive society. In general, think about the needs of people and remember that it won't be the same for every single person, so we must ask. We want to suspend judgment, and we want to really ask again what something means to someone. So if someone says, hi, I'm genderqueer, and you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know what that means, rather than being passive aggressive or even just sitting there quiet because you're trying to figure it out, why don't you ask, hey, can you tell me what that means for you, so that you're creating an open dialogue where they're free to express themselves and you're also getting information. So win-win. Use signs that display reaffirming gender inclusivity with gender diverse imagery, for whether that's posters, brochures, flags. I also want to say, try not to just do it for show. Amara and I were speaking, and we were talking about how if we see a flag on someone's door, then that might just be like they're just doing it to like be in the the trend. But when we actually go inside, and if we sit down and they have a flag or brochures inside on their desk, whether it's on their computer, on their pencil holder, whatever it is, that's kind of like, okay, they're the real deal, and they're actually here to support and be an ally to me. So have anti-discrimination policies posted, and continuously educate yourself and your colleagues on evolving language and the importance of gender and respect for person's identity. I think we can all do this, and I think that it really is in reach. And our youth peer advocates are the ones who are out there every day doing this work with the young people, creating these spaces for the next generation. And I really want to give a huge shout out and applause to all the YPAs who are here today and for everyone who is here today. And thank you so much to the panelists. And I'd really like to open it up for some questions. I see that we have a couple listed right over here. So the first one that we have, and if anyone wants to put it in the chat, if you have any more, feel free. And if you want to stay a little bit past 2:30 right now, it's 2:24, just doing a quick time check. I do just want to say, feel free to stay. If you can't, no worries. Thank you so much for coming. The first question that we have, and this is for all the panelists who are here. Any advice for people who struggle to identify as bisexual when they have not explored same-sex relationships, but they have the attraction to the same sex? I hear many invalidate themselves identifying as bisexual because they have not explored this. Does anyone want to take that on?
I'll say my best advice, so my best advice is like, it's sometimes you just have that attraction to somebody and it still is there. Like, I came out as bi in high school, but I'm pan now, which is all genders and everything. And, for the longest time, I only dated like cis men. And then I finally had dated someone who is gender fluid. and then it just happens over time. It's just who you just connect with, but you still have that attraction to someone different identity and everything, non-conforming gender and such. So you're still valid. I have a lot of friends that are bi and pan and such, and and they're in cisgendered opposite sex relationships, but they're still valid.
Right on. Thank you, Ari. Next up, we have, because YPAs often work with young people whose parents are in various places when it comes to acceptance, I'm wondering if you can talk about how YPAs can best support young people to have those conversations with their parents. If anyone wants, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amar.
I'll say a little to this. I kind of love the service component of youth peer advocates, which is skill building. And when you provide skill building to a young person while trying to support their like self advocacy skills, you can work with that young person to formulate ways that feel safe to them to have those conversations. So I think that's bringing it back to the work of a youth peer advocate and how innately the work that we do as peers can support young people within the LGBTQ IA community.
100%. Thank you, Amari. I also think we personally that maybe it's best not to encourage someone to talk to their parents, but just to show that they have a support in you or in whatever support role that you have in their life. And then once they see that they have one safe person that they can kind of bounce these ideas off of, maybe that would show that they can go to somebody else and also explore that with them, even when they might not feel safe in the first place. Because we can create that safe space for them, and then they have the opportunity to decipher for themselves, okay, I'm finally ready to talk to my parents. I'm finally ready to talk to my friends. But it's really in the hands of that person.
Yeah, I would kind of like to build on that, Robbie. I think this sounds almost obvious, but I think it's important to state, like, it is critically important that you don't accidentally out, well, like literally anyone, but like especially like youth you work with as a YPA, like like either emotionally or like physically safety wise, like they might be in a situation where if they are accidentally outed, like they're shut, like there's a reason Robbie brought up the statistic earlier, like 40% of homeless youth are LGBT in some way. Like, just you need to make sure that not only they're emotionally ready, but like you have their express permission, and that even if you have their express permission, they're going to be safe by divulging that information to anyone, but like especially their parents or guardians.
Right on. Thank you, Zach. I have another question. For context, I'm a school counselor and want to create gender-affirming space, but I'm not sure how to bring it up without coming off as I'm assuming sexual orientation. So I guess you're trying to decipher how to create a gender-affirming space rather than only affirming sexual orientation. Is that right? Okay.
I believe the question above with how do we acknowledge pronouns or sexuality for someone who won't openly acknowledge it for themselves is with this, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was a two-part question. So how, like for all the panelists here right now, how do we acknowledge pronouns or sexuality for someone who won't openly acknowledge it for themselves? I think one, it's not our place to identify it for them. It is in their shoes and it's in their hands. I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel though.
Yeah, it's their personal journey. And so you can assume what you want, but at the end of the day, it's up to that person to be upfront with you about what it is that they want to share. And if they never share it, then again, it's their journey, and you should certainly be respectful of that.
I think, yeah, I want to touch on the contextual question of it. One thing that was really impactful for me in middle and high school was learning of GSAs, gay straight alliances. Sometimes they're called different things in different schools, but it allowed a space that wasn't, you didn't have to identify as anything yourself. So making a space open enough to include all people who may benefit um, can be a starting off point. Um, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, both Aliyah and Amari. That was really a great and thorough way to answer that question. One other one. So you all described relying on informal support as being really important on your journeys. So as you work with young people who identify as LGBTQ+, who want or need to interact with the formal service systems, example, schools and mental health services, how have you supported them to advocate for themselves in these contexts? Do you think that there is a way to offer formal support rather than informal support? And what might be the best way? How can that look? And thank you everyone who is hopping off right now and for all the kind words in the chat. I really appreciate you all being here.
Robbie, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. So how can we support a young person who is trying to get involved in more formal support services as opposed to informal support services?
I think the first step is research. We can definitely help that young person do all of the research for just to become familiar with programs that they have access to. I think that that's a huge step in the process toward getting them formal assistance.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, this has been a really great experience for me. I love having you all here. I love that I get to work with you all, incredible humans. I'm really grateful that everyone attended this and came here to learn with us and have these conversations with us. It's really important to me, and I feel that we really have the opportunity to create the world that we want to live in, where we're making these affirming spaces and supportive spaces for our young people that we work with on a daily basis. And our youth peer advocates are the ones who are doing that, as well as a bunch of other different roles. But shout out to all the YPAs who are here and who are doing this good work every single day. And thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to come and learn with us.
And on behalf of CTAC, I want to thank all of our panelists. I really feel like you've opened hearts and minds today. And I just so much appreciate the time and energy and thoughtfulness that came to this webinar. And I think we see a lot of that in the chat too. I just want to encourage everyone, you'll get a survey link. And I want you to really give us some feedback on this webinar. What was helpful? What other information would you like? What kind of topics would be important to you for us to cover in the future? But really, thank you all very, very much, panelists and Robbie, for organizing this. We really appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll sign off and